host of the Athletic Football Show, Robert Mays, is back on the program. How are you?
Doing well. We're 11 weeks in here. It's crazy that we're already at this point in the calendar, but it was a heck of a weekend. So excited to dig into it.
I like it when it lives up to the hype, and it certainly did in week 11. Some other weeks, bit of a snoozer for me, but that's okay. This one was great. Let's start with just chronologically. People are waking up. Maybe they missed the end of this game somehow. You crazy people who somehow didn't stay up for this game. The Chargers, they hold on. The Bengals try to come back. They almost do, but the Chargers closed. I feel like, you know, when like Merriam-Webster puts out their list of like new words in the dictionary and words that are, I feel like the word chargering is going to be vanquished in the 2025 Merriam-Webster dictionary. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think we can call it Bengaling now, considering what they've done for most of the season and all the late game just devastation there's been in Cincinnati. How quickly the vibes can change from one organization to the other, I think that this was an indication of it. Right? A couple years ago, it just felt like the Bengals were always going to be there with this group. They were always going to be relevant in the AFC. The Chargers were always shooting themselves in the foot. And now it feels like that's shifted. And we have the Chargers on a trajectory that you can get excited about, and people wondering where this Bengals organization is and how they're going to pick up the pieces at the end of this year.
What's the lesson with these 2024 Chargers? It's just go out and pay the best coach, whatever, back up the Brinks truck kind of stuff for them? Like, what's the lesson in this 2024 Chargers squad?
We talked about this on our show last night, and I'm guilty of this. You know, over the last 3, 4, 5 years, I think that it's been tempting to look at the new hotshot offensive coordinator and think, this is the guy we need. We need the guy who's going to get the most out of our quarterback. We're going to put up a ton of points. You look at this season, though, Jim Harbaugh, Mike Tomlin, Dan Campbell, even some of the things that Sean McDermott is doing, Sean Payton coming in, and obviously that's good offensive architecture, but I think that just having somebody who's a proven head coach first and foremost, there's real value in that. Like culture and what the building feels like. And if you're getting the most out of your players, I think sometimes it's easy to overlook that in favor of the next hot thing. But what Jim Harbaugh is doing there, the bones of that place feel like they're in the right spot again. And I think that goes a long, long way.
And mea culpa on Greg Roman, because nobody clowned on that more than me. Nobody was like, what are we doing here? We're living in the past. He's one-dimensional. He's just going to, and he's been so great for this Chargers team.
Sometimes I think that he doesn't have to solve everything all at once, right? If you want to come in and Greg Roman can be your offensive coordinator in year one, you're trying to get things on the right track. I think Baltimore went through that, right? Where they got to a certain point where they realized their ceiling was a little limited with Greg Roman. They moved on from him, but there's no denying how good Greg Roman was for Lamar Jackson in those first few years. So just come in, let's establish a certain physicality, a certain mindset. This is the way we want to play. And over the next couple of years, you can navigate that. And if you get to a place in 2026 where you think, all right, we have receivers in the building now. We know what the quarterback is. Maybe we need to lift the ceiling on this thing. Maybe you seek out something else. But for right now, I think it makes sense for where they are. You
guys can listen to more of that on the Athletic Football Show. I didn't get to listen to last night's episode, so I'm excited to hear that. Coach of the Year. If you look at, Jim Harbaugh, he's got the Harbaugh Bowl coming up, by the way, next week. That'll be really fun. Dan Campbell is up there as well. Let's take a look at the odds here, at least on FanDuel Sportsbook. Who would you give it to?
Look at those odds. It's such a mess. There's no good answer here. And I think that this year, I think you can make an argument for like 8 different people. And I know that they had a tough game yesterday and I'm sure probably should have lost to the Bears, but think about what Matt LaFleur did early in the season with Malik Willis. You have to throw him in there. Sean McDermott, this was supposed to be like a soft reset year for the Bills. And instead, they're having one of the best seasons they've ever had with this regime. I'm still tempted to give it to Tomlin. In part just because I don't think we've recognized over time how good he's been. And I think this might be the right year to take a step back and say, it's incredible that he keeps this team in relevancy and playing the same way and getting the most out of those guys every single year. That's a little bit of a career achievement thing, but I'm tempted to do that this year just because I think the work he's doing really should be celebrated.
It's a really sound argument. We'll see how it ends up, of course, at the end of the season. You mentioned Bengaling. Zach Taylor not on that list for Coach of the Year. He's got one of the best quarterbacks. He's got the best wide receiver. He's got Trey Hendrickson, yet somehow they're the 10 seed and they're sitting there at 4-7. There's so much talent, it's not living up to it. Is it too obvious? Is it too, like, stock, dumb fan on Twitter to say, like, fire Zach Taylor, it's Zach Taylor's fault? Or is it Zach Taylor's fault?
I think there's a lot of things happening. And the Bengals and the way that they operate, one of the biggest issues, because they're not throwing a lot of cash around like these other teams
Yep.
are, and it's a little bit tighter over there. It's not that you can't pay your star players, right? They paid Joe Burrow. They're going to pay Jamar Chase. They are going to let T. Higgins leave, so that's something we can talk about. But the way that these other teams wield this money and these resources, teams like the Eagles, teams like organizations that have missteps on quarterback contracts, the way that money helps you is that it lets you overcome mistakes. If you have some draft misses, you can convert some cash, you can start paying free agents, you can supplement those mistakes. Because of the way the Bengals operate, the margin for error is just so much slimmer. So if you look at the last few years of Bengals drafts, the entire plan was to go get some younger guys on defense and have those draft classes supplement aging veterans that got expensive that you had to move on from. Jesse Bates, there are other examples.
DJ Reader.
DJ Readers, exactly. There's so many of these guys where they microwaved their defense on free agency in the first couple of years of Joe Burrow because they could, because their young offensive players were cheap. Then those guys got expensive, and they had to go cheaper on defense and younger. It didn't work. For some teams, you could just say, all right, we have to fix this in free agency. We have to throw some money around because the plan didn't come together. The Bengals don't do that. So now you're sitting here and you're having to piece it together with cheaper free agents and mid-tier guys. You know, you go get Von Bell at a discount, and they just haven't been able to do it. So that plan on defense never coming together, I think that mostly is why the Bengals are in this position right now.
I think they could have made it work with Bates, from what I know, and that was really disappointing.
I was worried that they weren't going to step outside of themselves enough and break enough of their rules and how they did contracts and how they spent money while they were in this window.
It's not even rules.
With a
it's
great
like their
young
comfort zone or something. It's
yeah,
like their precedent.
It's a set of principles they have for how they build contracts and how they spend money. And I do think that they've stepped outside of that a little bit over the last few years, even dipping into free agency in ways they wouldn't have, right? We've seen that consistently, but I still don't think they're on the same footing with some of the other consistent contenders in the league and what they're willing to do. And that's always going to put you at a slight disadvantage. And again, it's just going to make your margin for error when you make mistakes a little bit smaller than some of these other teams that you're trying to compete with.
Bills, Chiefs, Bills, we have the splits here, whatever they are. Bills win regular season, Chiefs win in the playoffs. Do you agree that it'll stay that way? Or after what you saw last night and just holistically with these squads, will it be different in the postseason?
It's always hard to bet against Mahomes in those moments, but I really do think that what the Bills are able to do offensively and the pop that they have, that's missing from this Kansas City team. The stat we threw out last night that I think is important. The Bills had 6 plays of 20-plus yards last night. The Chiefs had 1. And that's been the case all year. You know, the Bills are an explosive offense. The Chiefs aren't. And so I think having that gear just allows them to find those 2 chunks to Amari Cooper, that 26-yard Josh Allen scramble, that level of your offense and being able to find lightning in a bottle 3, 4, 5 times a game, that's really, really important. The Chiefs can't do that. They rely on their down-to-town consistency, and that just makes things a little bit more fragile than what your build is when you have a gear like this Bills team does. I'm trying to think, I don't know what the concern is for. I'm trying to think of the Chiefs thing holding them back. They don't have explosive plays. That's not enough for me. I think it's a big deal because you're having to those 3rd and 5s that they've been able to hit over and over and over again all year. When you have Mahomes, it makes it easier. But their numbers on those this season have been such an outlier and so astronomical. That's always going to come back to earth. And if you don't have a great defense to supplement that, then it's going to be an issue. And I think the defense is good, but I do think that they have some weaknesses that we're starting to notice. Cornerback depth, the pass rush isn't as good as you want it to be when they're not blitzing. There are imperfections to that side of the ball that I don't even think they had last year when they had L'Jarius Sneed. So I just think that the route and how everything needs to fall in place for them, too many things have to go right as they're currently constructed to overcome that lack of explosive plays.
Chiefs fans, he said it, not me. That's Robert Mays. You can direct your venom at him and the Athletic Football Show. Let's get into these Bears, shall we?
If we have to.
I asked my producer to get your sort of vibe on them after last night, listening to your amazing show. And you're like Pollyanna on this. You're positive there's good to take away from this?
all that really matters to me right now over the back half of the season
Rob?
is that the experience that Caleb Williams is getting is not detrimental to his development, right? It's not bad experience like the way it has been over the last couple of weeks.
Very pragmatic, yes.
And I think what happened yesterday, it's hard not to feel good about that. The way that he looked, the flashes he had, how consistent the offense was down to down, how fast he was moving, the decision making, the operation, all that stuff was great. If that's what we get for the next 2 months, I've already come to terms with what this season is and what probably has to happen this offseason. The quarterback and setting him up for success over the next year or so, that becomes the most important thing, and that's really what I'm focused on.
Do we have footage of the blocked field goal? Do we have that? Do we have any footage? Oh, there's some footage. That's what I want to see in a Monday recap show. Love this. It was a 46-yarder. It gets blocked. And then before we get into this, I mean, people are criticizing Eberflus, of course, for not running one more play to get into better position. But Kenny Clark said this after the game. Kenny?
Man, it was huge. It was huge, man. You know, TJ, KB, we talked about it all week. You know, that they had holes in the middle of their field goal protection, and you know, Coach Rich been telling them all week, you know, if they didn't get a block, you know, it was going to be a problem, man.
They knew it was going to be blocked. That's such a dagger in this little Chicago girl's heart.
It makes it easier if it's a 37-yard field goal instead of a 46-yard field goal. And so letting those 30 seconds tick off, I think, is a huge mistake. I've seen that a couple times. Speaking of the Bengals, and the Bengals did that earlier this year.
Stop bringing back to the Bengals.
I'm telling you,
we're friends.
These teams that are making it a little bit harder on themselves than they need to, it's going to come back to bite you. And that's exactly what happened to Chicago yesterday. And the Bengals had one earlier. I can never support that. I can never support shutting it down and kicking a 46-yard field goal to win the game when that's not your only option. And so that was the part that was frustrating in the moment. The end result was less frustrating than the process by how they got there.
There we go. That's Packers-Bears round 1 late in the season, week 11. Some highlights. Caleb looking okay, trying to make it happen. Let me get to just one more. Would you rather talk about Bo Nix, or would you rather talk about the Niners?
I'm good with whatever. I mean, I was impressed with Bo Nix yesterday.
All right,
I think the Bo Nix.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the Bo Nix performance stood out a little bit more than the Niners did, just because I think it was eye-opening on a few different levels.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean? Tell me. Eye-opening in what way? He's working his way into the OPOI conversation. I love it.
I think it's a combination of his performance and the Broncos offense. Those two things in concert yesterday, and watching them was very cool and very encouraging. One, they might have the best pass protection in the league. And I don't think we've talked enough about the quality of their offensive line and the way that they've played this season. Right to left, this is a very good unit, and I think they've built their offense on top of that, and it's led to a lot of success. Two, I love the ways that they're figuring out their personnel. Like the usage of Marvin Mims yesterday as a yak guy, schemed touches, using him as like eye candy in the backfield and all the motions. I think that Sean Payton has really gotten a sense of what this offense should be with Bo Nix and the players that he has. And then the final layer of this is Bo Nix made like 6 throws in this game that made me stand up straight. Like he was very impressive when he was asked to make down the field throws, late in breakers that he had to progress to. It's very, very encouraging to see where he is now compared to where he was 5-6 weeks ago, when I think he looked demonstrably less comfortable in the pocket than he does right now.
Over 300 yards passing, 4 touchdowns. Go out and find the best coach and pay him whatever he wants is the lesson we are learning this season. Stay through the break, would you? Robert Mays, everybody. We're going to just take a quick TV break, but we are live on YouTube. Go check out the Athletic Football Show for more Marvin Mims talk. Can't get enough Marvin Mims. If you look at offensive Rookie of the Year vibes, I mean, Jaden was the runaway, right? And then you look at this, and I'm trying to just, if we comp the two, I think we have it. Do we have it? There we go. What do you think?
I definitely think that Bo Nix is closing the gap. And the last couple games that we've seen from Jaden Daniels, I think that Washington offense is slowing down a little bit. I do think that if you look at some of the underlying numbers, Washington's offense down to down has still been one of the better offenses in the league, and the Broncos are just cracking above average. But we know this is a narrative award, and we know that the groundswell and the storylines and how this is going to go over the second half of the season is going to go a long way in figuring out who wins it. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw that gap close a little bit more if we have more weeks like week 11 where Washington slows down and it seems like the Broncos are really figuring their stuff out.
We're going to go overtime with you, and I got to ask about the Niners. They just can't finish games. They can't close things out. It looks like a bit of a different team. They're sitting there at 5-5. People questioning their playoffs. And their hopes losing to the Seahawks. Why can't they close games? What's happening?
I think it's kind of a similar conversation to one we had about the Chiefs, where this Niners offense, when they were really rolling, think about all the chunk plays that they were getting. Think about how explosive they felt all the time. And that's just not what we're getting out of this Niners team. And I understand that George Kittle didn't play yesterday. I know that Brandon Ayuk isn't in the lineup, but everything just feels so much harder. Right? It's 3rd and 11, and you're getting 11 yards because Jawan Jennings is carrying 3 people for 5 extra yards. That's what this offense feels like right now. They just don't have the pop that they've had in recent years, and that just makes everything a little bit harder, a little bit more volatile, and it leaves you with less margin for error. In those coin flip games, it's just going to be a little bit tougher, and they've had way too many of those this year.
Last one before you go, we have Andre Reed on, obviously 7-time Pro Bowler, like an incredible Hall of Famer. I'm going to ask him who he thinks the best receiver in the league is. Who do you think he'll say, Chase or Jefferson?
That's actually a really good question, because I wonder if somebody who played in the league really appreciates the nuance that Justin Jefferson plays with and just some of the details, because I do think that's where Justin Jefferson separates himself.
But
he's
Jamar's
probably the best
so
route runner in the
good.
league. But there's also part of me that thinks, is Andre Reed watching Jamar Chase and thinking, that's just something totally different. And I have respect for that because of how good of an athlete he is.
Why do you
It's interesting.
hate-
I had a conversation with the coach last week about the same thing.
Really?
And they said in their building, they were arguing about it, and the staff was like split 50-50.
It's the one question I made sure to text my producers last night and say, I gotta know. I gotta know who he likes. And it was like in the first quarter. And then obviously Jamar Chase had a monster game. We'll see. I feel like you hate the Bengals. We're gonna dig into that. I'm gonna get like a couch for you to lay on. We're gonna unpack that psychology. The trauma.
I really don't. It's because I expect so much of them. That's why I'm so disappointed.
Robert
That's
Mays,
it.
you're the best.